My name is Hughes VK2HUZ. Been a member of this, or was a member of this club for about 20 years. Got involved through Scouts and Jota. Ran Jota down at Narrabeen for more years than I like to think. But I've always worked on the water professionally, mostly on Sydney Harbour. And in 2005 I went to Tasmania for a holiday for a week. It was for 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th trip to Tasmania, and my wife always had a like for the look of Tasmanian boats. And we didn't go down with the intention of looking at boats or buying one, but on the last day, and this is surely a lesson in how not to buy a boat, I'd made an arrangement to meet an acquaintance who had the care and control of a 45-foot fiberglass boat, which I had been involved with some 20 years before as a customs officer. We'd seized it, and it had been variously a customs boat, and then it had been given to the College of Knowledge, the University of Maritime Studies in Launceston, and I wanted to catch up with it and see what had happened to it. So I sent down there for a course early in 2005 and met the person who cared for it, made an arrangement that next time I was down there I'd have a look at the boat known as Pinduro, which I duly did in October 2005. And walking off the wharf, I walked past an old wooden fishing boat, and I said to him, "That's a nice looking boat." He said, "Yeah, it's a deceased estate, it's for sale," although it wasn't advertised. And I walked back to the car where my wife, who I refer to as the Admiral, was sitting, waiting for me patiently. And she said, "That's a pretty looking boat." I said, "Yeah, it is." I said, "It's a deceased estate, it's for sale." The reply was, "We could buy it." Well, at least I'd spouse approval. But I looked around it. We had some problems within the family with sudden illnesses and so on. Although I'd owned a number of boats previously, I decided not to get another one till I retired, because I was working fairly hard shift work. But the discussion in the car back to the ship, as we went back to the ship to come back to Sydney, sort of centred along the lines of, well, maybe we should get it and fix it up so we can bring it back to Sydney as a pre-retirement project. So that's effectively what happened. Although I looked at a few alternatives, this one still seemed to be the best bet at the time. I'm not so sure now, but still. Eventually, after some dealings, I got possession of it on Christmas Eve 2005. Then we went down to have a look at it in January and found it in a sinking condition. It had a wet well in it, which it had been a cray boat. It's used for crayfishing. A wet well is a watertight compartment in the middle of the boat that holds water, but at the same time keeps it isolated from the rest of the space, inhabitable space in the boat, the engine room. But this wet well was leaking quite badly into the engine room. So we made a decision that we had to do something about it pretty quickly. So 40 miles up the Tamar River to Launceston on the tide. You don't go up that river against the tide. It's a 3-metre tide at Low Head, which is the north end of the Tamar River. But when you get to Launceston, it's a 4-metre tide, because the water rushes up the river with the tide, and then comes to a very sudden stop because the Tamar River, which is quite wide and commodious, if you don't worry about the mud banks too much, suddenly runs into two quite small streams. So the water that rushes up the river's got nowhere to go, so the tides are consequently a fair bit higher there. So you work the tide up and down the Tamar River. We got up there and got onto the slip and patched the leak up, and then I was advised you better find a shipwright to do the work on it, because it became very apparent that the only thing we could do is take the wet well out entirely and convert that space into cabin accommodation, which was the intelligent thing to do if we weren't going to use the boat commercially crayfishing. Well, it worked out. I found out that the boat had been built in 1947, expected to last about 10 years. The hull was hewn pine. It had a Gardner in it, which was rather nice, but the best marine diesel engine you can get. Referred to as the Rolls-Royce of marine diesels. Rolls-Royce do not make a good marine diesel at all. At all. By any description. Anyhow, we got this boat, and that's it coming off the slip. I just want to see what we get in the way of a better photo of it. I'll just run through a couple to...
Where was it built, Tom?
It was built in Prince of Wales Bay in Hobart. That's it coming off the slip. It's working on it. Don't worry about that. Oh, that's some hewn pine there. This is hewn pine. Now, hewn pine is a very soft wood. It's got a remarkable sap in it that no insects can tolerate. And when the boat was working as a cray boat, they used hewn pine exclusively in the fire. They had a little potbelly stove in there for heating and cooking, because it was the only fuel they could bring aboard that didn't bear pests, didn't carry ants and spiders and things. So they used hewn pine. Now, hewn pine you cannot cut down, but you can cut up. Think about that. It means you can't cut the trees down, but the ones that are lying around you can cut up to use. And there's still a lot there to recover from the rivers. And with Gary Kerr's book, I could do a lecture up here one night purely on the hewn pine story. But that's some hewn pine that we cut up to make for planks for the boat, and there's about $4,000 worth of hewn pine there. It's not cheap. Now that's inside the wet well. That's looking at the bottom of the boat. That's the outside where we're starting to... These are new planks we have to take in the bottom of the wet well to allow water to roll over to keep the crayfish fresh, give them fresh water. There are 2-inch diameter holes through the bottom of the boat. So when I got hold of the shipwright, he was a lovely old German fellow, and that's another little story in itself, because I was told he was the only one who should do the work, and I eventually got hold of him. He didn't have a mobile phone, but he was known to have a female assistant who did have. And he's about 70, she's about 36, but there's nothing between them other than that they find it convenient to work together. But I got hold of her, and she said, I'll get Rudy to talk to you. And Rudy said, what's going on? So I told him, and he said, yeah. He said, I remember that boat. I was going to do that job on it 5 years ago. I said, well, it's time to do it now. When could you think of making a start? And he said, just a minute. He obviously went through a mental work list and said about 3 years' time. All the good shipwrights in Tasmania got more woodwork than they can poke a stick at. no shortage of work for good shipwrights down there. So I said, well, look, that doesn't really please me or suit me. I said, you've been recommended to me as the best person to do this work. And I said, you've said you know the boat. And he said, well, with the workload I've got, it's about 3 years before I can start. So very dejectedly, I got on the ferry to go back to Sydney, and about an hour out of Devonport, heading north, the phone rang. It was right on their extreme range of the phone. And it was Rudy. He said, look, he said, I've shuffled my work around a bit. He said, I can start on your job on Monday. Obviously, he felt something for the boat. And it's been an amazing experience, this boat. I said, well, look, that doesn't suit me because I'm on the ferry going back to Sydney at the moment. I've got to go back to work. When I get back to work, I'll make arrangements to take some holidays because I want to be down here on hand while the work is being done. And we agreed with that, and I ended up going back about 3 months later, and we got stuck into this job. And he was a remarkable workman, absolutely remarkable. He was just on 70, and the work he did and the quality of the work he did was mind-blowing. But this boat drew so many people that knew it. I was working on the slip one day, and an old fisherman came. He said, I remember this boat. He said, it used to have much lower bulwarks, the handrails on the side. He said they're only about 6 inches high. And when it was going around the west coast, it was pretty wet. We used to call it over 1 and under 9. Waves, that is. So it was pretty wet. But then one year, when it was in for slipping and that, they put a higher bulwark on it. This, for those who don't recognise it straight away, is the foot of the echo sounder, and that's a little paddle wheel that will read the speed off through the water as opposed to the speed over the ground, and the two are never the same.
What's the keel made of?
That's blue gum, but it now has an inch of steel along the bottom and 3/8 of an inch cladding up the sides, weighing 750 kilos.
Ballast.
Yeah. Well, when we took the water out of it, and when we took the wet well out of it, we had to put 5 tons of lead in it. Well, that was the...
it'd be full of water.
Yes,
yeah, of course, yeah.
It's to replace the weight of the water. Oops. That's Shirley. She was a very good shipwright, remarkably. A very good shipwright. That was one of the old fuel tanks that came out. You can see how much rust there is on the top of it there. It had a leak on the side. Sorry. That's putting new planks in. That's the water tank that was in it. Fuel tank. Now, that's the tide. Shows you how big the tide is. Here. That's low tide. High tide, you've got water up to there. You can't lie alongside that wharf too long because the tide will run out and you get stuck.
Is that the Launceston?
Yeah, that is right at Launceston, actually. That's the South Esk River that goes up into the Cascades there. That's the bridge over it, obviously. Yeah, that's at Tamar Marine, right? Only about a kilometre right out of the centre of Launceston. Some of the boats there that sit on the mud at low tide. Switchboard. Now that's what the boat looked like without a mast in it. This here is the entrance to the accommodation, which is down forward. Then there was a wet well there. It was in here in the middle of the boat. we've retained that hatchway. It's been moved further aft, but that's what it looked like. The main mast had to come out because it was so to fit up on the slipway under shelter. So there's a roof over the slipway, which is a real blessing in that weather. Leaving, heading north on the ferry. We had a couple of trips up to Sydney. It was the first time my wife ever. It's the boat show in Sydney. That's a good shot of Rudy there. These are the ships that run across to, for the cattle across to Flinders Island. But they can only draw about 3 feet to get in and out of the port. That's the Batman Bridge. Now there's 4 knots of current under there, so if I go under that bridge with the tide, I'll be making about 11 knots. The boat will only do 7 under power. Now that's looking through there. These bits of wood here we added because these ribs were broken. A lot of them were broken in a row, so we added these there called deep floors. And then we assisted the ribs as well, so the boat is now a lot stronger really than when it was built.
This is all here in pine, isn't it?
No, the deep floors we use celery top pine, which is very similar to hewn but a bit cheaper, and it's also a bit harder, but it doesn't have the it's not quite as grub proof.
And then the ribs. What about the ribs?
The ribs are blue gum. Now that's the cooling for the engine. Keel cooling, probably the best form of cooling to have on a boat, because you run your coolant through the engine, then through that, rather than have a heat. That's effectively a heat exchanger. The other alternative is to have pump seawater into the boat through a heat exchanger, then back over the side, which means you have to have another pump and another system, which this means you don't need. Well, that's upside down. Irrelevant. Now this is interesting for one point. This vessel here, there were 3 of them built. There's a pilot cutter from Newcastle. The pilot cutter from Sydney is at the other end of the Tamar River. And the third one was just recently sold by auction, but it was somewhere around Sydney. But there were 2 of them side by side in Launceston, the old pilot cutters, the Girralong and the Goondaloo. That's the anchor winch. I've been really blessed. Now that's 90 degrees to what it should be probably, but that's a hydraulic motor there to drive the anchor winch. I've got a electric clutch on the engine to drive a hydraulic pump, which gives me an anchor winch and a winch down at the stern for lifting the dinghy out, which is real good. That's where the whole lot of planks off. That's Shirley being busy, putting back in the water. We had to completely rewire the boat as well. I've finished that one. I'm going to show you a little bit of a DVD now, and I might fast forward it in places because it's a bit boring, otherwise it runs far too long, but there are some fairly spectacular bits on it. Now, after we finished the work on doing the boat up in Launceston, it came around to January 2009. I spent 8 months working on the boat in Launceston over 3 years. I gave myself a real fright one day. I counted up, I was employing 7 tradesmen to work on the boat on the one day. And that's was a bit expensive for me, because I'm only a common worker, I'm no millionaire. Now this is the boat. Now, can we fast forward there for a bit? Where do we?
I don't know.
Yeah. Perhaps so. Now there. Yeah. Right. No.
Stop. Stop.
Yeah, stop.
Too far?
No. There's a. Yeah. There's no. Just.
Not quite as fast.
No. We just. Is that the fast forward there?
Yeah.
Yep. Keep going. Right there, that'll do it. There, this is departing Launceston. Now, what I will do to Dom is make the boat available if somebody wants to pay for fuel. It's not a commercial vessel, I'm not chartering it, but if some of you would like to come out for a run, if somebody pays for the fuel one day, I can take 10 at a time. 46 foot long or 14 metres. Now we run VHF Marine Radio plus HF. The HF is run on the antenna is a triatic stay. The VHF antenna is on the top of the mizzen mast, which is the smaller one at the stern. You've got radar, very old radar, but it works. Now I also run a laptop on board as a chart plotter that has got a bigger screen than the ones that you buy, but it also gives me the internet for email and weather forecasts, which these days are very good on the. That's the HF. Now we're heading down the river. It's about 40 miles down the river to Low Head before we go out to sea. Going down to check the engine room. I was rather lucky. I had a crew of 5 at this stage, and one of them was my old deckhand from Sydney Ferries, and he had a camera. He drove the camera. He produced this for me, and did a pretty good job for considering he was he was just doing it like that. You probably can't hear that. It's me talking to Tamar radio. Then we go over to talk on the HF. But that night when I tried to call them, I couldn't get them. The base had been hit by lightning and they lost all their radios. So this round thing there, for those who don't know, the big thing in the middle, that's a Clearview screen. The black bit in the middle is an electric motor, and the glass here spins quite fast and throws all the water off, so you've got a clear view through that regardless of how much water's been thrown at it by rain or spray. They worked remarkably well, have largely gone out of fashion, but that one has got a history. When we're coming back from Tasmania, coming in through into Sydney Harbour, the Pong-Su, the North Korean ship that was sunk after having been arrested for drug running. He was lying at Clifton Gardens, and I saw this clear view on it and thought, well, that's going to go to waste. I need a couple of them, or one of them. So I made some inquiries and a couple of phone calls, and I was invited to go and help myself. But I was told by the Commonwealth police officer that I could have them, provided I didn't tell anyone where I got them. So I haven't told you that. But then I had a problem because they'd cut the wiring off at the shell of the motor and there's nothing to tell me what voltage it was. It was North Korean. It was 110 volts AC. So I had to go to US to get an inverter for it that put out 110 volts. It was only about 300 watts. So. Yeah, this is the tide rushing past at near the Batman Bridge that goes across the river. And here at this point in time we'd be doing about 11 knots on the bottom, which would be close to 20 kilometres an hour. Then we can bolt that forward a bit now for wood. That's some of the pulp mill there. And to give the anchor a run, and okay, that'll do. This is out along the north coast of Tasmania, heading east. Along the north coast now. It jumps a bit here. It's not continuous. It took us about 3 days to get down to Hobart because we just did ran during the day. It was fairly rough for a bit, and unfortunately didn't get photos when it was really rough. But when we went through Cape Banks, which is the northeast corner of Tasmania between Flinders Island, or the southern end, the islands at the southern end of Flinders Island, and the mainland, we had the wind against the tide, and it's really stood up and looked at us. The seas were about 3 to 4 metres high with curly tops. But I was very pleasantly surprised no one on board was seasick. This is heading down the east coast of Tasmania with a couple of dolphins playing with us. Where did we get to? Oh, we've stopped. We got into, come around the inside of Freycinet Peninsula to anchor for the night. And that was another yacht I went over to say hello to. But hopefully in a minute it'll turn around and have a... Well, this is me trying to get out of the dinghy and I couldn't get up the stern of the boat, so I had to take it round the side to, go forward a little bit.
What were you heading down to Hobart?
For the Wooden Boat Festival. Oh yes, we had a ship there. That was a bit of a challenge. Up there you go. Don't go back a little bit here. Can you just go back a smidgen?
We can do it.
Yep, that'll do. Right there. Now this is entering Marion Narrows. For those that don't know Tasmania, the east coast, there's a channel, or the entry of Marion Narrows. You go through a series of bays and come out at the Dunalley Canal, or Denison Canal. There's a bridge over it which you have to get opened. The canal there was dug by the convicts. It's used by small craft up to, that draw up to about 8 feet. There's a shortcut so you don't have to go right round the bottom of Tasman Peninsula. Obviously you don't hear about it with the Hobart race because they're not allowed to go through there, but a lot of them come back that way. It's a shortcut. It saves about 70 nautical miles. This is getting into Marion Narrows. Then you've got this big long bay about 10, 15 miles. Then this is the canal. Now this canal here is about 300-400 metres long. it was dug by convicts. And when you get up to the bridge, the fellow that opens the bridge wants a can of beer or $2 from every boat that goes through.
The troll.
Is he rich or is he an alcoholic?
He'll stand there and put out a bucket on a stick. Then we went to the wooden boat show, which was quite an experience, and I'll be taking the boat down there again next January for that. It's the 8th to the 13th of February. That's the Iron Pot Light, the first lighthouse built in Australian waters, that one.
So you're on a sailboat here, is it? Or
Sorry?
you're on the sailboat? Or?
Well, it is and it's not. It's a motor sailor. It was originally built to sail, but it's got a good engine in it now, 75 horsepower. And for this trip, most of the time I was using the engine only, but we do have some sails. The main is green canvas.
Oh, okay.
Is it gaff rigged or?
No, it's Bermuda rigged, but I've got 2 forestays, so I can run a big jib or a small one, or maybe even 2 at once.
So how many guys do you need to raise that? It'll be pretty heavy, I imagine.
2. I'd like 2. I don't put it up on my own. Now, we'll skip the wooden boat show because that's fairly tedious for people that weren't there. Now, with this film, this CD, it was given to me after the event. I had nothing to do with its production, and I didn't tell the fellow where to take photos or when to use it, when not to. So it came as a bit of a surprise after the event. But
You run into Russell?
yes, I did. Now, can we just stop there and go back a little bit? There's one thing that's there. There's only 2, I believe, in the world. A steam-powered outboard motor. Just come back a bit further.
It's next up as well.
This is the other one.
Yep, that was it. There it is. And just come back a couple of frames if you can. Yep, there. There's only 2 in the world, but this is it. Steam-powered outboard. But it works remarkably well.
A bit heavy.
Okay.
I like that one.
Yes. There's some very, very nice boats down there. Anyone who is into wooden boats, that's an old one, Maluka. That belongs to Sean Langman these days. He's been down the Hobart race twice recently. But now there's where you get the top dog, is the bloke on top, the bloke down below is the underdog. And that's where those terms came from. Yeah, cutting up a piece of wood. But there's an awful lot of wood cut up that way for planks for building. I can bolt it in a bit now unless anyone particularly wants to see that. There's bits that I want to talk about around the south coast. Linden was called after the elder daughter of Rupert Den, who was a cray fisherman. The boat was financed by Kazamati, a fish buyer, who always kept a little bit of interest in the value of the boat, but it was built in 1947, and Rupert Den fished it for about 40 years. He lived on Bruny Island, which is just south of Hobart, but he worked on the west coast of Tasmania, round near Port Davey. Now, after this event, we took the boat round to Port Davey, and it's an absolutely stunning part of Tasmania, which very few people get to. The traditional ways to get there are to walk, and it's a 4-day walk from where you park your car each way, right across the bottom of Tasmania. Or you can fly in by light aircraft, but once you get there, you've got to walk everywhere unless you take a canoe with you. The other alternative is to... I just want to stop it there for a minute. We've got fuel there, obviously. I just want to try and pick up a little bit
capacity.
Sorry?
How much fuel would you put on it?
Well, I burn a litre an hour at 6 knots. The fuel capacity of the boat is 1,400 litres.
Big fuel bill.
Yeah. But if I use it wisely, it's fairly economical. I mean, it's sort of $10 an hour. But I carry enough fuel to go to Hobart non-stop, or probably just about all the way back.
Okay.
Fuel measuring is by dipstick, the most reliable means.
The new tanks are made of what?
They're plain steel, but they're coated on the outside so they won't rust. I just bolted on a little. Just want to try and pick up a little bit of Bruny Island. People lived in Barnes Bay, and we went in there and spent the night at anchor in Barnes Bay out of respect for the heritage of the boat. Then we went down to Dover, which is a bit further south down the D'Entrecasteaux Channel. Then to Research Bay, which most of you would have probably heard of in relation to the James Craig, because that's where it was left to rot. And that is Research Bay is the southern end of the basically the mainland of Tasmania on the western side of Storm Bay, if I can just describe it like that. Kettering is just across the D'Entrecasteaux Channel from Bruny Island. Oh, that's crayfish. They taste good too, believe me. There's a processing place here at Dover where the fishermen can land them. That belongs to Sydney fish markets, but most of them are transported up to or frozen, flown to Japan and places like that. Just come ahead a little bit more, please. Right, oops. Yeah, this is Research Bay. There's a bronze of a baby whale there on Whaler's Head. This was Research Bay, where we stopped anchored for the night. There's a fishing boat there. And I was down there last month, and actually I walked from this southern end of Research Bay south for 8 kilometres to the south coast of Tasmania with a relative. Okay, this will change in a moment. We just want to get round the corner. Because from here we went out of Research Bay, then down the coast, and then across the bottom of Tasmania. This boat worked down there all the time when it was a working boat. But we had a bit of a rough trot across going around because we picked the wrong day to go. But we had a magnificent trip coming home. Can you just go fast a bit for a minute? Just get away from this. There we got underway. Okay. Past the whale and out to sea. It was at 6 knots, it's 10 hours, it's 62 nautical miles from Research Bay to Port Davey. And this boat holds the record for being trapped in Port Davey by the weather for 43 days. Still holds that record. Often down there you get winds to force 9 on the Beaufort wind scale. Force 8 is gale force, force is a full gale, force 9 is heading for storm force, talking about winds of 50 miles an hour. 50 knots. Now this is Round Top Island, then we come to Matsyker Island. Then there's, in the far distance, up ahead there on the left-hand edge of the screen, shortly will be Southwest Cape. Round Top Island. Round Top Island and Flat Top Island. Then somewhat south of there, there's another bit of rock sticking up out of the water about 30 miles to the south called Pedra Branca. I believe the surfers are known to go down there to surf the waves at Pedra Branca when there's a big swell running. But this was a magnificent trip. As country I never thought I'd ever have the chance to see. When you walk right along there, if you're going to walk to Port Davey, you have to walk all the way along that, or within a couple of miles of the coast. And that's Southwest Cape there. Go belt it forward a bit.
So this is still in February, or?
Yes. Yes. We eventually got back to Sydney on about the 28th, 27th of February, something like that.
I see you running the sail there. Does that save much on fuel costs?
It wasn't there for that reason that day. It was there to steady the boat to stop it rocking around so much, which it does very well. But yes, it will certainly assist. And next time, oops, come back. We're overshot. Just come back a bit. That'll do. This is the approach to Port Davey from the south. It makes it a bit confusing because he waves the camera around. But we're approaching Port Davey from the south, and it's off the entrance to Port Davey is a barrier of islands called Great Sea Spit. And the waves have been known, because the next land to the west is South America. You can get some quite bad weather there and quite big weather, and it will, waves will go right over these Great Sea Islands, but they're, 40 metres high, 30, 40 metres high. But this is wild country. This is absolutely beautiful wilderness. But people lived and worked here. Rupert Den fished this area outside Port Davey for 40 years, as did his best friend Clyde Clayton, And if anyone's interested in this sort of area, there's a very good book which I've just been given called Wynne and Clyde. Now, Clyde was a fisherman and he ended up building a house up here, one of only 2 houses in the area. Sorry, he built 2 houses, of only 3 houses in the area. The other was built by his brother-in-law, who was a tin miner at Melaleuca. And that story is King of the Wilderness, the story of Denny King. And that's an excellent book too, on this area. This is about to enter Port Davey. That was my wife in the red hat and the son-in-law in the other there. Yeah, we got into Port Davey here. It's like this all the way in. It's absolutely magnificent country and absolutely desolate and isolated. Some of the ground, there's very few trees.
I presume the water's brown from the tannin as you go.
Brownish. It wasn't very brown, but there's a fair bit of rain in the area, so it's diluted a bit. But yes. But there's celery top on it. No, it's not. No, it's not. We anchored. We had 36 hours. We had 2 nights in Port Davey before we had to come back. And the day we came back, as you'll see in a moment, the sea across the bottom of Tasmania was as calm as that floor, literally. It was absolutely magnificent. There were heaps of birds flying and fish breaking the surface and the birds after the fish. And I put this is where we anchored for the night, the first night, with the birds on the shore there. But the fish on the breaking the surface, something underneath feeding on them. And I put a spinner, I thought I'll see what I can catch. Put a spinner out over the stern and hadn't been out for wasn't out 5 minutes. And one of the other crew said to me, you better have a look at your line. There was a seal after it, lolloping along, chasing it, so I didn't want to catch that. All right, I think we'll leave that there for the moment. We'll stop it. This is a remarkable boat that I fell over, it seems by destiny. It's cost me a lot of money, but I love it dearly. I'm only a caretaker. I will have to sell it one day because I can't take it with me. It will live a lot longer than I will. But it has turned out that I'm almost related to the original owners. I've just been down to Tasmania last month to meet a brother that I knew of but we weren't allowed to communicate with for 20 years. And with him I had lunch with the younger daughter of the original owner of Linden, and they knew so many people in common, it was mind-blowing. So it seems that I didn't know it until last month, but I'm broadly connected with a whole lot of people in southern Tasmania and southwestern Tasmania, and it's been an amazing experience. Any questions?
Where do you keep it now?
Pittwater is just a little bit northeast of Bayview Yacht Racing Association Clubhouse.
When are you free to take us out?
What about well, probably Saturday or Sunday would be better. It doesn't make much difference to me. Say early in March. I'll have a talk to Dom Bragg and see if we can organise a date. How does that sound?
Good.
And we'll have to make it a limit of about 10 at a time. If there's more than 10 want to come, we'll go for a run up Pittwater, maybe out to sea a bit if the weather's reasonable. If no one gets seasick, we'll stay out there a bit. If not, we'll go west up to Refuge or somewhere like that. Maybe bring a bit of lunch.
So what's the time to travel from Hobart into Sydney?
Good question. 46 hours from Hobart to Eden and 36 hours Eden to Pittwater.
Okay.
We had 24 hours, 26 hours in Eden, stop over in Eden.
How did you organise the watches?
Well, in Tasmanian waters, it was only during daylight. It was fairly casual, but to come across Bass Strait, I had 3 other people on board. 2 were relatives, and 1 was a ring-in off the street who proved to be... it was a coincidence that I met him when I first bought the boat. Then I ran into him at the boat show and said, "You want a trip north?" And he said, "Well, I've got to go to Sydney," and it turned out he was able to come with us. So there was 4 of us on board. I insisted on 2 on deck at night at a time, no one alone, 4 on, 4 off for the trip across from Hobart up to Sydney. But otherwise, it was mostly it was all day hopping. We'd make 60 miles a day, 60 miles in 10 hours, a bit more if we stayed a bit longer. In the summer months, it's a very long daylight hours in Tasmania. It's lovely to get a long twilight. It doesn't get dark till 9 o'clock at night. But we do have definite plans to go down and take the boat down again next January. Take some family members around and then go to the wooden boat show and probably certainly one, if not 2 or 3 trips to Port Davey. So with different people. We've only got 5 bunks on board. They've worked out how to fix up a 6th one, sling a hammock under the boom, under the awning. So any other questions?
Did you use amateur radio on it as well?
I haven't to date. I'm more than happy to. For those that there'll be some of you who've been involved would know that I've been involved with the Canoe Classic for 22, 24 years, and I always get involved with amateur radio on that, of course. Been at Checkpoint Lima, and because this boat won't fit under the bridge, I have to borrow a boat every year. There's been a different boat every year. But I haven't got an amateur radio set up on board permanently at the moment, but I'll almost certainly put one on before we go south, certainly 2 metres. When I bought it, there was a second long wire. One of the shrouds on the port side was insulated, but that disappeared when it was re-rigged, so I've only got the Triadic stay, which has got a Kenwood and an automatic tuner on it for marine frequencies. Whether that can be adapted to double with amateur or not, I don't know. I might seek advice on that.
Well, on face value, I would have thought yes, and there's plenty of people here more
Yeah.
experts than I, but I would have thought it would be perfect.
Yeah,
12 volts.
but I found for most of the time here, marine VHF has been adequate for what I've needed, other than the Canoe Classic, and that's always been a temporary setup on a stranger's boat. But the marine HF has gone into a real mess, because the only base station that you can rely on now is Charleville in Queensland. There is a website that gives hourly predictions for what frequency to use for that, which I have got on the computer. I've used it a couple of times, but at the moment, other than annoying people, I don't use the HF. It's an old ICOM 700, M700, Marine 700. One day I thought I'd see what happened. I was in Refuge Bay, which is sort of surrounded by cliffs, and I thought, well, I wanted to call Terry Hills. And I thought, well, I'll try. I doubt if I'd get them on VHF from there, so I thought I'd give them a try on HF, but the reply came from Adelaide. On 4 megs, so at least it proved it worked. Yes, well, I did a lot of DX listening before I got my amateur licence, and I used to listen to boats in Fame Cove on 2 metres, the old 2524 regularly, and then more recently, when I listened when I first got the boat, I did actually hear boats in Port Davey calling Hobart Radio on HF. But when my boat was trapped down there with a fisherman on it, I heard from a third party that was also DX listening at that time. The message from Lynn Den was, don't worry about the socks and undies, but please send some more bread and beer. But no, she's a good old boat, and she'll be still going long after I'm dead. So hopefully somebody will give it the love and attention that it deserves then. But for the moment, I'm hanging on to it.
12 volt electric.
I've got 12 volts for the house battery, 24 volt for the starting, for the main engine, and the toilet. The toilet's also 24 volt. And I've got a 2.5 kVA inverter for 240 stuff. One of the things that I did find on the boat when I bought it was a 240 volt, 1 horsepower pool pump, which doubles as for washing the deck down, emergency bilge pump, and also, most important, washing the anchor chain. I've got a length of hose up to the bow and wash the mud off the anchor chain. It works very well for that.
So is it fully restored now, or you've still got more work?
It's a wooden boat. The work never ends. It's not restored in that it was not put back to what it was. It's been rebuilt. The hull has been largely rebuilt. The cabin work is totally different to what it ever was. So you couldn't say that it was restored, but it's habitable, it's usable, and there are some modifications that I'm still making in the cabin, particularly for storage lockers and so on. this week the life raft goes away to Queensland to be serviced and resurveyed. I've got to put a new eye bolt, piece of stainless steel about so long with an eye at one end and threads and nuts at the other, right through the stem, because the existing one that holds the inner forestay is rusted, almost rusted through. So, yeah, work continues. There's no rest for the wicked.
There's nowhere closer than Queensland to send the lifeboat? It seems a long way to...
Well, the life raft is a 6-man inflatable. It's a Great Circle brand, and they're about $1,000 cheaper than the RFDs and the other brands, and it's only serviced every 3 years, not every year, and Great Circle are based in Brisbane, and it's costing me $70 to get it up there and back, and the first 3-year service is free, so I can't complain.
Yeah, it's pretty good. What do you coat the actual hull with? Do you anti-foul it? Is there,
Yes.
Yeah. Is there anything special because it's wood? Like,
So,
is there any sort of oiling or protection you put on the wood before you put anything else to protect the...
you normally put a special undercoat on before you put the anti-fouling on, but anti-fouling is at this moment undergoing a great deal of change. They're coming up with, instead of using so much heavy poison like the tins and the coppers, they're going more for Teflons,
Okay.
so nothing can stick to it,
Makes sense.
which makes a lot of sense. But having said that, I have had a slight problem last time it was on the slip with the dreaded teredo worm, which didn't get into the hue and pine, because they don't like that, but I've got 2 what are called bilge keels down the side, which are lumps of wood about stand out from the hull about 12 inches. They're about 5 inches thick, about 30 feet long, and they're probably a relatively cheap pine, and a little bit of worm got into that, but we hurriedly dug it out and filled it up, and generously put plenty of anti-fouling over it. But the dreaded teredo worm will get into just about any wood that grows. It is known to go into hue and pine, but not very often. It's only when there's nothing else around that it likes better. So yeah, that's fairly safe. Also, if you go up into fresh water, there's no teredo in fresh water, so go up to Launceston for a month or 2 and any worm that is in the wood will die. Any other questions? No? All right, I've bored you to tears. Now, well, that's been an interesting 5, 6 years I've had her now. So it's really been a life-changing experience. But yeah, she's there, and good solid boat. Some of the woodwork that the Tasmanian shipwrights performed is absolutely mind-blowing. The deck beams across the inside the cabin top in the cabin dovetailed into the sides, cabin sides, and there's no gaps. There's not half a millimetre of gap anywhere. So the quality of the work that I had done down there is, you know, you can't get any better.
I gather Rudy probably taught himself or had a very training in the long past with the young woman in her 30s. Well, what would her training be to be a shipwright?
Well, Rudy was an interesting case because he started off as I believe as a cabinet maker, then fished for many years until his father was drowned in a boating accident off northern Tasmania. Then he ended up becoming a shipwright. But the normal trade for a shipwright is a 5-year apprenticeship. Unfortunately, there's not many opportunities these days for shipwrights to learn wooden boat work, which is specialised. Most of them end up in places like McConaughey's Yard down here at Mona Vale or other fiberglass boat places, because fiberglass is the mainstay of the boating industry these days. And it has a lot of problems. Don't think that a fiberglass boat is free of problems. It's not. They get a lot of problems in them. And so some of the problems are wood related. I mean, I've got a relative down at on Pittwater with a Columbia yacht, and he's got all sorts of problems. There's a fiberglass yacht with a fiberglass cabin and a fiberglass deck, but in between the layers of fiberglass, there are pieces of ply, and water's got into them, and they've gone to soup. So now they've got to cut the fiberglass out above it, glue new pieces of ply in, and then re-fiberglass over the top, as if, you know, that's going to be quite a major job for a tradesman to attack. It's not something a home handyman could think of doing. But the wooden boat building is not necessarily all that different to other woodwork, but it is specialised in that. You think of a cabinet maker or a house builder or a carpenter, he's always working with square corners. Everything has got to be square and vertical, upright or horizontal. Boat building is everything opposite. Everything's curved or round or angled or so on. So, sorry? Yeah. I had, working on the boat down there, a chap who was a good carpenter, good woodworker, but he'd had very little experience on boats. But he was working with a very good shipwright who did some beautiful work. But this chap was given the job of working out. He was, 40-ish. He was quite competent. But he was given the job of working out how to build 2 lockers across the front of the boat, and those that come out in the boat will see them. One for gas bottles and the other is a rope locker. They had to have opening lids. They had to fit into the shape of the boat with sloping lids, and the lids had to be watertight. And they have drains so that water that went down the back where the hinges are was run away. And he did it, and he did a beautiful job of it. So, there's... I worked down there when there was work being done on the boat, at least when I was in Tasmania in that period. I spent 8 months down there over 3 years, and while I was down there I worked 11 hours a day, 7 days a week on the boat. But no one else worked on the boat if I wasn't there. So, and one night after the first major bit, when we did all the planks in the hull, I had to get extended leave from work. I was working for Sydney Ferries, and I was working out some long service leave, and but it ended up I had to get back to Sydney, and the job had to be finished to go in the water the next morning, and at midnight there were 10 people working on the boat to get it finished to go back in the water the next morning. I said, well, it's got to go back in before I go to Sydney, and tomorrow's it. So they all rallied round, and the shipwrights didn't charge anything for overtime, just normal rates for the hours.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, no. Some of the people there didn't even charge. Wow. That worked back that night. But, it was... then the fellow turned up 5 minutes before the boat went in the water and wanted to talk to me about it. He was the second owner. He'd just driven past and seen it on the slip and recognised him. I said, well, I'd love to talk to you, but just a bit awkward. But I've had wonderful, I still have email contact with both the daughters of the original owner, and they're both keen to go around to Port Davey with me in January or February. Soon after I bought it, I was asking questions about, the original owners and so on, and the name, and eventually I was given an email address for the elder daughter that it was named after, who was living in Rockhampton at the time, or still is actually, and I sent her a blind email, just said, I've just bought a boat called Lindan. Her maiden name was Lindan. And I'd like possibly to discuss the history of the boat with you, and it's past. But if you find this email offensive, please reply, tell me so, and you'll never hear from me again. I won't bother you. And I got the most excited reply back the next day. The two girls had lost contact with where the boat was, or had lost it, and now they'd found it. And she sent me photos of it from the early days, and so on. So it was all very happy. And as I said last month, I was down in Hobart to meet relatives, and we had lunch with the younger daughter of the original owner, and it was so great. But it's a good boat, and it's now listed at number 309 on the National Register of Historic Vessels. So with that, I shall shut up.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.